Some of you have been asking when I'm going to start doing big board rankings for the 2016 NFL Draft. Well, this is the first official one. I'm starting off with the individual positions as I finish out scouting and evaluating all of the prospects. I'll compile a list and give it to you in splat. Here we go. I'm starting off with quarterbacks. Feature that. So you can check out my rankings of the quarterback prospects in this 2016 NFL Draft in the description box down below. It includes where they rank and what round I grade them in. And when I say what round I grade them in, it's not necessarily just a reflection of what round I think they should go in the draft, but what I evaluate them as in terms of a talent, what their actual grade is. Now, as you can see, probably not a lot of surprise. At the top three quarterbacks on my board are Carson, Wentz, Jared Goff, and then a little bit further back, Paxton, Lynch, in that particular order. In my opinion, somehow, someway, those are the three clear-cut best quarterbacks in this 2016 NFL Draft. The three quarterbacks that are the most likely to develop into starting NFL quarterbacks. The three quarterbacks that have the most franchise quarterback potential. Now, when I look at Paxton Lynch, part of the reason he's a second-round talent is you look at the system that he played at in Memphis. You know, this was a guy that didn't have to read the field a lot. He didn't have to go through a lot of progressions. I think he's quite a bit of a step back from the mental aspects of the quarterback position for the NFL level, especially compared to Jared Goff, let alone a Carson Wentz. Then when I look at some of the mechanics in terms of how he throws the football, here's a guy that fundamentally has a very strong arm, but at times his mechanics and the way he uses his throwing motion, I think, saps some of that velocity off of the ball. He is a guy with huge upside, arguably the most upside out of any quarterback in this draft class. However, I think it is going to take time for that to develop. Now, even though I have signed a second-round grade to him, I think in this particular draft, teams are crazy, stupid, and not doing a good job if he is still on the board come Friday evening at the beginning of round number 2. I would expect there to be some type of activity for somebody to try to trade back up maybe into the bottom portion of round 1 to go get Paxton Lynch, because in a draft class like this where you have three quarterbacks to me that are clearly above the rest, you have to, if you need a quarterback and want a quarterback, find a way to get one of those three guys, because they are the three that are a cut above everyone else. In terms of the overall thought process of this quarterback class, I think it's a much better overall class than last year's. You have several other guys after the top three that could, in theory, potentially develop into starting quarterbacks down the road, or at the very worst, be real quality backups. The overall depth and talent level of this year's draft class for quarterbacks is much, much better than last year's. Is it 2014's? Man, maybe better than them as well in terms of overall depth from top to bottom. I have a total of 14 guys that I deem as draftable. In terms of the guys that I don't have as draftable, but I've got them listed as numbers 15 through 20, the priority free agents. Some of you might be asking me about some of them. I'll say this: Trevone Boykin would have been a draftable prospect to me until he got into that off-the-field trouble. There's just no place for that. It wasn't just a speeding ticket or a DUI. I mean, this was something a step and above beyond stupid. And for a guy that was already borderline as a quarterback prospect to begin with, I'm just not investing a draft pick on him. You could bring him into camp, be a camp body, and let him prove himself. A lot of you might say, well, why isn't Brandon Doughty from Western Kentucky a draftable prospect to you? I'm just going to tell you flat out, I just don't see the arm talent there. I think he was a product of the system that he played in and the level of competition. I don't think his arm is particularly strong, nor do I think he is particularly accurate. I think, if anything, the system that he played in and what he was tasked with and what he was responsible for inflated his production significantly. When I look at Brandon Doughty, I see a guy that you bring in as a fourth quarterback, a camp arm, maybe sits on the practice squad for a year or two, and that's it. I do like Blake Frohnapfel, the quarterback from UMASS, in terms of his size, in terms of his arm strength. There's a project there. He's got NFL tools, at least a couple of them. Those are the type of guys that you do like to bring in camp and see maybe what you can get out of them. But in terms of this class, who's got the strongest arm? I think the strongest arm by far is probably Cardale Jones from Ohio State. In terms of pure hose and pure hose strength, he is a cut above the rest in this draft class. There are other guys with pretty strong, functional NFL arms. No question about it. Carson Wentz, Paxton Lynch, You look at Christian Hackenberg. These are all guys that have the hose to be able to make all the NFL throws, no question about it. But in terms of pure arm strength, Cardale Jones is a cut above the rest. In terms of the most accurate quarterback in this class at this time, I think beyond question it is Jared Goff. When you watch his film at California over 3 years, you see the growth of the progression in terms of his accuracy. Really, really accurate quarterback, really good in his ball placement, and I think he is a cut above the rest in this draft class when it comes to that. The most mobile and the best athlete to me are one and the same, and that is Carson Wentz. I mean, this dude at 6'5", 230 pounds can move. He is a similar level athlete to Andrew Luck, and I would argue even a little bit better than that. Some people might even compare him to a Cam Newton, which again I think is not that far off in terms of the athletic package. My NFL comparison for him was Marcus Mariota. Mariota was the most athletic quarterback in last year's draft class, who I compare Carson Wentz to. This year, Carson Wentz to me is the best functional athlete. Some are going to sit there and say Cardale Jones. Some are going to sit there and say Dak Prescott or so on and so forth. But I argue that Wentz is more overall athletic as a quarterback than those other guys, and in particular does a better job of utilizing that athleticism in a quarterback fashion, not just as a runner, but as a thrower as well. So when coming to that, I think he's the one. In terms of the best decision maker, I'll actually go with Cody Kessler from USC. I think this is a guy that's pretty good in terms of his game management skills and his overall decision making. As a general rule, yeah, sure, he might have the occasional bad game, but he's kind of a check down king. He's not a guy you feel like is going to hurt you a ton in terms of making a lot of really bad, terrible decisions. In terms of that mental aspect of the game and making the best decisions, I think the best NFL decision maker at this point in time is Cody Kessler, even though the physical talents don't necessarily equal out. The most NFL ready, a lot of people are going to talk about Jared Goff, and I would agree with that assessment in general that I think he is NFL ready. There could definitely be an argument made that he's the most NFL ready, but I also think Carson Wentz is a lot more NFL ready than a lot of people want to give him credit for. Even though he played at a lower level in college, he played at a high level, if you will, at that lower level. He has all of the traits and characteristics that you're seeking out of a young franchise quarterback that you're going to spend a high pick on and build your franchise around. And when you look at this guy, you just see everything in place, and you can see this guy has a firm grasp of the mental aspects. He comes from a pro-style system. He's played under center as well as out of the shotgun. He can do a lot of different things. Especially when you look at his feet and his athleticism and his mobility, he can simply do things that Jared Goff cannot. And when you talk about NFL ready, those are the type of things that can help a guy like Mariota in terms of a pocket passer. While I thought he was underrated heading into the 2015 draft, there's no question that his bread and butter initially was going to be his athleticism and his movement skills and his ability to run with the football. And it made him more NFL ready than a lot of people wanted to give him credit for because of some of those athletic things that he could do. Where you thought maybe Jameis Winston was more ready as a pure pocket passer, I think people slept on how ready Marcus Mariota was, and I think they're sleeping on Carson Wentz's ability to be NFL ready from day one as well. In terms of the biggest risk in this draft, I don't know that there's a big, huge risk. Some might say Paxton Lynch, and I could understand that assessment because of the fact he probably will get taken somewhere in round number 1, that he is a long way behind in terms of the mental aspects of the game. But I'll go with Cardale Jones. I get a sense that somebody may gamble with him in a second or third round pick because they're going to see the size, they're going to see the mobility and athleticism, they're going to see that hose of an arm. They're going to look back at that 2014 run at the end of the season where he helped lead Ohio State to the national championship, and they're going to say, hey, this guy's a project, but he can be a project that really pays off. But there's a lot of risk here. I have some questions about his maturity. I have some questions about the mental aspects of the game from a standpoint of being able to go through progressions, read defenses, and to be fair, a lot of quarterbacks in this draft class have that issue, have that question about it. But when you look at a guy like that, you wonder sometimes if he's going to get overdrafted just because of physical tools. Now, the payoff could be tremendous. In terms of physical upside, there is a part that could say that a Cardale Jones could potentially be the best quarterback out of this entire draft class. And I don't dispute that assessment. I don't dispute that notion. But there is a lot of risk potential there. He is a huge boom or huge bust potential. I think you feel a lot better about him if you draft him around 4 or 5 as opposed to if you have to draft him around 2 or 3. A sleeper in this draft, a guy that I don't think is getting the attention that maybe he deserves, that maybe is a little more NFL prepared than people want to give him credit for. I'll go with Jake Rudock from Michigan. This is a guy that was successful at Iowa. Then he went as a graduate transfer to Michigan, spent a season under that quarterback guru that is Jim Harbaugh. And I look at Rudock and I say, yes, you have concerns about his size, concerns about his arm strength, concerns about his accuracy. But if he can improve his arm strength even a little bit, he can put a little more weight on his frame and become a little more accurate. This is the type of game-managing starting quarterback that you can win some games with at the NFL level and that you would love to have as a quality backup. And I see a lot of people have him as an unrated or undraftable prospect, and I don't agree with that assessment. I think this is a guy that you could spend a mid to late day 3 pick on and feel like you have a guy that has a chance to stick around for a little while. In terms of the most underrated quarterbacks in this draft, I'll go with the guys that have 4th and 5th on my board. That's Jacob Coker and Jacoby Brissett. When I look at Brissett, I see a lot of people have Dak Prescott rated ahead of him, and not just ahead of him, but by several rounds. And I say, what the fuck are people smoking? Is it because of the fact Brissett played at NC State and Prescott played in some big games in the SEC at Mississippi State? To me, that's what it's got to be. Because I can't logically see how people could sit there and say that a Prescott is so far superior to a Brissett when it's just not the case. I think Brissett is a better overall athlete. I think he has a stronger arm. I think he has a more accurate arm. I think he is a better decision maker. While Dak Prescott has definitely improved in terms of his field vision, I think Brissett is no slouch in that category either. I just don't understand why more people aren't bigger on Jacoby Brissett. I really, really don't. And then when it comes to Jacob Coker, here's a guy that didn't play a lot at the college level, started off at Florida State, eventually had to transfer to Alabama, had to wait his time until 2015, got that opportunity, and even though he stubbed his toe maybe a little bit initially, ultimately he became an effective starter for them, and he was an integral part of them winning that national championship. You could talk about Derrick Henry, and you could talk about that defense, but Coker had to make some big plays, and he had to make some nice throws, in particular in the national championship game against Clemson. And when you look at a guy that's 6'5" with a strong arm, with the athleticism and mobility that he has a lot of NFL tools. And a lot of people are rating him as an undraftable prospect, and I just don't see it. I see a guy that I'd be itching to get in the early portion of day 3. I really do. In terms of the most overrated quarterback prospects, I think there will be a lot of agreement on these two guys. It's Christian Hackenberg and it's Connor Cook, and I don't think it's close. The whole assessment of Christian Hackenberg talked about how he was so far superior in 2013 under O'Brien than compared to 14 and 15. I just don't think holds a whole lot of water. And all the talk about blaming the system that he was in, at the end of the day, part of the responsibility of a quarterback is to be able to persevere, survive, if not thrive, in adverse situations. Quarterbacks, and the measure of really good quarterbacks and great leaders, are those guys that can get the most out of those that surround them and get those guys around them to play better than they actually are. And Hackenberg just does not possess that ability to me. And I think it's crazy when people are talking about him as a pure prospect rating, talking about how he is a second-round talent. I just think that's insane. Now, drafting him in that position might be a little bit different, depending on the circumstance, depending on the team and the situation. But again, when you're talking about Hackenberg, this guy, frankly, was never a first-round talent. Shame on us for ever asserting that he was. Same thing with Connor Cook. You're talking about a 5th-year senior that was a multiple-year starter at a high-level program in Michigan State at a big conference like the Big Ten, and half the time he still can't hit the blind side of a barn. When you look at a guy, yes, he has a strong arm, and yes, he can make some spectacular throws, but he misses a lot of easy ones. And you look at a guy like this, and then you factor in the questions about maturity and work ethic and leadership. I still see mock drafts coming out with Connor Cook's going in round 1, and I say, what the hell are people smoking? This guy is clearly a day 3 prospect to me. There are so many other guys in this draft that have more upside and more potential than Connor Cook does. I guess I'm just really, really down on Cook in general as an NFL prospect. Now, that's not to say he doesn't write some of those things and become a starter. That's very, very possible. And in theory, when I look at this draft, I can see potentially those top 9 guys. I could potentially make an argument that in 3 years, all of them have the ability to become a starting quarterback at the NFL level. They do, and that includes Connor Cook, because there are some physical tools there. But when a guy still struggles with accuracy as much as he did 3 years ago, with all of that experience at a high level, you really have to pause and say, hey, why couldn't this guy figure it out? Why didn't they name him team captain? Why was this team able to beat Ohio State without Connor Cook in 2015, where they couldn't beat him with Connor Cook before? It's a fair question. So again, Those are my rankings. You can check them out. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions. In terms of those of you wondering, well, why aren't you doing scouting report videos of Vernon Adams and Nate Sudfeld at this point in time? I may if I get time, but frankly, I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball, and I got to get through a lot more prospects and a lot of other positions. So don't count on it. I may get there. I may not. In the meantime, there are 12 other quarterbacks that I have put up scouting report videos for the 2016 NFL Draft. Make sure to check them out as well.